I'd barely known Sumit before 1989, but the tumultuous events of that year brought many of us together. The brazen murder of Safdar Hashmi, the Tiananmen Square killings, and soon afterwards the fall of the Soviet Union spawned street protests, marches, public meetings, conferences, workshops, and reading groups. And this brought many of us close to one another. We met virtually every week, if not daily, at a Sehmat event or a workshop on socialism or at anti-communal forums such as Sampradayikta Virodhi Andolan and later the People's Movement for Secularism. We also went to different schools of Delhi, interacting with teenagers, asking questions and answering their questions. We spoke at public halls, not only in Delhi, but also in other parts of the country, in Hyderabad, Bhopal, among others. And as I said, we also held reading sessions at each other's home. Those who were part of all of these, and some of us invariably were at that time, came naturally close. One particular event is worth remembering, and Sumit, of course, was part of that. We had printed leaflets against communalism, and we went to different areas of Delhi to distribute them. As part of this endeavor, we came to Nehru Place. There was Tani and I, and of course Sumit and Tonika, Anuradha and Kamal Chinoy, Gautam Navlakha, Nivedita Menon, Aditya Nigam, PK, among others. Not a very large number, about 12, 13 of us. But suddenly we saw ourselves surrounded by about 50 people aggressively raising slogans against us. Soon the crowd swelled, not only in the chalk, but in all the balconies around it, shouting down at us and in unison, Jai Shri Ram. The noise was deafening and the situation quite frightening, very intimidating. Soon the police arrived and whisked us away. We thought we were being arrested, but we were put in jeeps and fortunately sometime later just let off. We were taken away from that crowd. A very intimidating experience it was. We also organized and participated in workshops and seminars. One of them is particularly memorable. That is the study week on secularism organized at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. This was an unforgettable event because of an astonishing experience. In a session on partition violence, this was I think in 1997, Urvashi Batalia presented what was to later become a chapter in a book. One of the participants, Professor Satish Sabharwal, listened to her, and in the middle of his response to her, recalling what he felt was his own complicity in the slaughter of innocents, complicity not by action, not in action, but by silence, he broke down. And as he wept, all of us, one by one, began to choke and then sob inconsolably. There were about 20 of us. Sumit howled too. It was a massive cathartic moment, as if we were all letting go of our guilt and having personally allowed this catastrophe. These kind of experiences were bound to turn political camaraderie and intellectual companionship, at least for some of us, into lifelong friendship. Sumit Sarkar was clearly not only a scholar who spent his time in the archive among books, in libraries and seminars. He believed ideas belonged to the public world. They must enter civic life, enrich democratic debate, and help societies reflect upon themselves. Sumit was an exemplary citizen. I think a lot of you have talked about it. who knew that there are times when we have to fight not just with a pen, but with every morally permissible resource, and not just in print media or in seminar rooms, but on the street. Over the years, his position evolved, his understanding deepened, his arguments became richer and more nuanced. But while his views changed, his values remained constant. He always stood for reason, for justice, for human dignity, for equality, and for freedom. He believed that intellectual life carried with it a moral responsibility, a responsibility to speak honestly, to think carefully, to resist prejudice and tolerance. He helped us understand our past, interrogate our present, and imagine a better future for everyone. For him, secularism was a given, and it meant the cultivation of a society, simply speaking, in which people with different faiths, identities, and convictions could live together in mutual dignity. Sumit also understood, PK mentioned that, Sumit also understood that democracy is sustained not only by institutions, but by habits of mind, openness, civility, self-restraint, and a willingness to listen. And that socialism was at root about having a high quality of sociability, about having non-instrumental social relationships, where people viewed one another as having intrinsic worth. Sumit possessed a learning that, as is widely known, was unusually deep and wide. He was a master in his own field, modern Indian history, and modern history in general, and inspired admiration across the world. But he never confined himself within its boundaries, again something that has been mentioned. But one could begin a conversation with him on a specialized question of history and find oneself an hour later speaking of poetry, music, painting, ethics, religion, popular culture, constitutionalism, or the dilemmas of public life. And yet his erudition was never a wall separating him from others, but a bridge. He never used knowledge to intimidate, but always to illuminate, and not from a pedestal, but as a co-participant. But of course, the most distinctive and remarkable feature of Sumit was his intellectual humility. It's very easy for scholars to begin with humility, and as they age, as they grow in stature, to become not only intellectually aloof but arrogant. Not Sumit. He had all the intellectual virtues that one expects from a profound thinker. A deep and abiding desire for knowledge, accompanied by a disposition not of self-doubt, but of a very healthy epistemic uncertainty, without which no gain in knowledge is possible. He was always very thorough and always open to self-criticism. And to admit that one has been wrong in the past requires moral courage, which he had in plenty. Intellectually arrogant people, this has also been mentioned, intellectually arrogant people are poor listeners, and they rarely take contrary views seriously. They also become, over time, impervious to evidence. Sumit was a perfect listener and steadfastly went where evidence and argument took him, even if on the way it unsettled his own views, and equally importantly, the views of his close intellectual companions. Holding on and speaking firmly about your own convictions, despite the uncertainties surrounding them, is an art that Sumit had learned gently, quietly over time. He never prematurely sought closure of ambiguity. He'd rather live with it than move into a false zone of comfort. For Sumit, humility was not merely an attitude or a mood, but a structural feature of how good thinking proceeds. If it demanded the deliberate deferral of certainty, he would happily do it. So Sumit, as I said, had no trace of intellectual vanity. Fame had come to him, and deservedly so. His writings were read internationally, widely. His voice mattered in public debates. His scholarship commanded respect. But these achievements sat upon him lightly. There was never any display, never any posturing, ever. His erudition, I think this has already been mentioned, never intimidated people, never crushed them, it uplifted them. I cannot end my tribute without a short anecdote about Sumit and Tani. Tani has this very unusual and very special relationship with all our friends. So on one of the many visits to our home, Sumit took his shoes and socks off, came gently and sat down. Tonika, of course, was also there. Tani joined us 10 minutes later, and when she entered, her eyes fell on Sumit's toenails that she immediately felt, and that's a personal feeling, were in an appalling condition. Tani is a sharp observer and quite fussy about aesthetic, although it hasn't made any impact on me. Within minutes, from nowhere, a pedicurist appeared. Sumit did not quite know what force of nature had hit him. Job done, we had lunch or dinner, and when they reached back home, Tonika, who was mighty pleased with this task that Tani had undertaken, called us to say that Sumit was very pleased. "My feet are transformed," he explained in wonder. Sumit's simplicity, as you know, was very disarming. Thanks, Sumit, for your kindness, your gentleness, your erudition, and your friendship. You will live with us forever.